We tried to set the course up to help our team. Obviously, it wasn't the right decision. I think anytime you're the leader of a team or you're the captain or the coach or whatever, we talked about this last night, you have to take, you're going to get the accolades and you need to take the blame for when things don't go well. And I definitely made a mistake on the course setup.
The Ryder Cup at Bethpage Black was supposed to be legendary, and it was, just not in the way anyone imagined. The final score barely mattered, drowned out by controversy, sharp words between captains, and a crowd that swore the whole event was spiraling out of control. Somewhere deep in golf's rulebook, something broke wide open, and the shockwaves haven't stopped since. So what actually went down at Bethpage? Time to dig into the chaos. The 2025 Ryder Cup at Bethpage Black was meant to be America's redemption story. Loud fans, home advantage, and Keegan Bradley leading the charge under immense pressure. But when Sunday's singles were over, no one was talking about birdies or last-minute heroics. The spotlight had shifted to something far stranger, an obscure rule buried deep in golf's handbook, known as the envelope rule. And that one clause flipped the entire weekend on its head. Viktor Hovland, one of Europe's biggest threats, pulled out with a neck issue. Under Ryder Cup tradition, each captain secretly writes down one player's name before the first tee, the unlucky one who sits out if the opponent's player can't compete.
Each Ryder Cup captain has a really awkward assignment. He has to choose the player on his team that he trusts the least. Ryder Cup's envelope rule came into effect in 1979, and what it says is that each captain has to put one name in an envelope before Sunday's single.
This time, that unlucky name was Harris English. When Hovland withdrew, English automatically followed, and the match was scored as a draw, half a point each, no contest, no showdown. The scoreboard read 15-13 for Europe, close, but the optics were brutal. Instead of a dramatic comeback, fans witnessed bureaucracy over battle. Team USA, clawing for momentum, saw one of its own sidelined by nothing more than a technicality hidden in fine print. When the closing ceremony rolled around, the tension was as heavy as the summer air in New York. Bradley stood tight-lipped, Donald stayed polished and polite, and online debates were already erupting over whether this envelope relic had any place in modern golf. That night didn't feel like a victory party, it felt like the beginning of an investigation. Keegan Bradley didn't hold back. He didn't dodge questions or pretend the loss didn't sting. Just minutes after Europe hoisted the trophy, he faced the cameras and dropped the line that now echoes through Bethpage. It has to change.
Well, there was some tough news for the United States team before the Sunday singles matches even started. It involved an injury on the European side. Viktor Hovland pulled out of the singles because of a neck injury. Not a surprise. He was forced to pull out with that same injury yesterday in four-ball competition.
But he wasn't venting about team choices, missed shots, or the New York crowd's intensity. His frustration was aimed squarely at the envelope rule, that archaic technical trap that left Harris English sidelined for reasons beyond his control. Bradley framed it as a matter of fairness, insisting no healthy player should be benched because of a rule they had no power over. English wasn't hurt, he was geared up to play. But thanks to golf's outdated, rarely invoked rule, his clubs never left the bag that Sunday. The timing made it explode. His comments hit the airwaves barely moments after the loss, raw and unfiltered. Analysts labeled it bitterness, fans called it truth. On social media, his words caught fire, clips looping non-stop with captions split between "he's got a point" and "just excuses." Bradley didn't roll out a plan or list fixes. He hinted he had ideas but said they could come later. This moment was about taking a stand.
Ready for this? This is a plot twist. The envelope rule in the Ryder Cup is a really, really easy fix. This is so off topic, but this is something near and dear to my heart. It's an easy fix. This is what you do. You have an alternate. The Davis Cup has an alternate. You have an alternate in the Ryder Cup. It's not crazy to think that you could have an alternate.
In his mind, Team USA had been wronged, and the rulebook itself was guilty. Whether he meant to or not, Bradley changed the entire storyline. It wasn't about missed putts or European dominance anymore. It became a debate over policy, and whether one obscure rule had quietly stolen Team USA's chance at glory. So here's the question. Was Bradley fighting for fairness, or just venting after a brutal defeat? Let me know what you think in the comments. This debate's heating up fast, and I'm following every take. Then came Luke Donald. If Bradley was the flame of Bethpage, Donald was the cold water that put it out. Calm, precise, and impossible to rattle. The European captain never let Bradley's frustration box him in. His reply felt like a lecture in golf history. Donald calmly reminded reporters that the envelope rule wasn't some European loophole. It's been part of the Ryder Cup for decades. Both sides agree to it before play even starts. Every captain signs it, every player knows it, and it's woven deep into the Cup's tradition.
Decision was made a while ago that I wasn't playing. The last 48 hours, we had the team set. We weren't scrambling at all. This was a really tough decision. I would say there was a point this year where I was playing a while ago.
Donald subtly hinted that if Bradley had a problem with the rule, the time to speak up was long before the first tee shot, not in a bitter press conference after losing on home turf. To soften the edge, Donald didn't ignore the emotional side. He expressed genuine sympathy for both Harris English and Viktor Hovland, admitting no one likes seeing players sidelined, but his stance was firm. Rules aren't meant to be rewritten just because the result hurts. He even cautioned against rushing into rule changes without clear reasoning, warning that reacting out of emotion could actually destroy the fairness the rule was designed to protect. To Donald, this was about more than a single half point. It was about perception. He carried himself like a statesman defending tradition against emotion. His composure made him seem like the adult in the room, while Bradley came off as frustrated and impulsive. And in an event where appearances matter almost as much as results, Donald walked away not just as the winning captain, but as the guardian of golf's delicate balance.
So say someone on Team Europe gets injured and can't play, US captain Keegan Bradley has already written down a player's name from his side. So if that should happen, that name will come out and that match will go down as a tie.
As if the drama between captains wasn't enough, the crowd at Bethpage seemed eager to play the villain. Luke Donald found himself battling not just Bradley, but the fans who were meant to bring energy to the Ryder Cup. His judgment was blunt. They went too far. This wasn't a case of rowdy cheers getting out of hand, it was chaos. Donald listed the incidents one by one, taunts during players' swings, heckling aimed at European families, and even a moment where a tossed beer hit Rory McIlroy's wife. The so-called 12th man for Team USA turned into an uncontrollable mob. Donald's warning cut deep. Passion is fine, but disrespect isn't. McIlroy himself didn't hold back either. He condemned the crowd's behavior as unacceptable, and videos quickly spread of him staring down the stands, caught between anger and disbelief. Donald folded the crowd issue neatly into his wider clash with Bradley. For him, this was no longer about a quirky rule. It was about respect. By publicly challenging the fans, he expanded the conflict. Suddenly, it wasn't just captain versus captain. It became Europe standing for sportsmanship, while America seemed to spiral.
There is a rule, a long-standing rule for decades amongst the captain's agreement here at the Ryder Cup, that each captain must submit an envelope to the other team, and that envelope will have a name of a player on their squad. Now, if there is an injury, there you see that rule.
Bradley stayed quiet about the crowd, and that silence only amplified Donald's point. In the court of public perception, Europe appeared composed and principled, while the US came off disorganized, emotional, and controlled by its own supporters. What should have been Bethpage pride quickly turned into Bethpage embarrassment. Donald used that chaos to step into a new role, not just as captain but as golf's unlikely guardian. So who really came out on top? Bradley with his passion and outrage, or Donald with his icy calm? Drop your thoughts below and make sure you're subscribed. The Ryder Cup drama is far from over. Every Ryder Cup captain faces one uncomfortable task: choosing the player he trusts the least to be sealed in that envelope. When the press conferences ended, sports analysts dove in like vultures, spotting fresh drama. And soon, the storyline split in two: Bradley the fearless truth-teller, or Bradley the bitter loser. Golf Channel and Sky Sports spent hours debating whether Bradley's fury was bold or desperate. Some praised him for challenging a rule that's been ignored for generations, while others dismissed him as a complainer, reminding viewers that Team USA once benefited from that very same rule. Donald's composure under pressure won over the media. Commentators called him measured, mature, and steady, a captain with real authority. Bradley, on the other hand, was labeled emotional and impulsive, words that sound flattering until you realize they suggest a man who lost control. Online, though, Bradley's outrage became viral gold. His "it has to change" moment flooded TikTok and Instagram, pulling millions of views as fans argued, was he standing up for fairness or just venting? Donald's careful responses didn't trend as widely, but in the professional world, his reputation for composure only grew stronger. By midweek, journalists framed the story like a legal showdown: tradition versus reform, emotion versus reason, image versus results. And in that courtroom of opinion, Donald emerged as the calm strategist, while Bradley looked like the emotional protester shouting into the wind. The fight was no longer about the score, it was about who owned the story. The Ryder Cup may be over, but its aftershocks are just starting. Bradley's three-word bombshell, "it has to change," pushed the envelope rule into full review.
What is that alternate going to do? That alternate can be a vice captain in the Ryder Cup. There's already golfers who are vice captains in the Ryder Cup. What you do is you announce, this is my alternate. He's going to be a vice captain.
On those grounds will be the alternate, and they can just get subbed in and go.
Committees from the PGA, DP World Tour, and Ryder Cup Europe are now facing mounting pressure to revisit the rulebook. Ideas for fixes are already floating around. Let captains pick alternates, award a full point instead of half, or get rid of the envelope rule completely. But each proposal raises new problems: fairness, roster size, and whether too many safety nets could kill the Cup's suspense. One thing's clear, Bradley dragged the issue straight into the spotlight, and it won't fade before 2027 at Adore Manor. Meanwhile, Donald leaves Bethpage with his reputation stronger than ever. He didn't just win on enemy turf, he stayed calm through a storm that could have tarnished his name. If Bradley becomes the voice of reform, then Donald stands as the symbol of tradition. Two captains, two legacies, forever connected by one sealed piece of paper that changed everything. Long after the last cheer faded at Bethpage, something unusual began happening across the golf world. Coaches, players, and even casual fans started digging into the Ryder Cup rulebook, realizing that the envelope rule wasn't just a quirky tradition, but a symbol of how slow golf is to adapt. Club pros posted TikToks breaking it down. Podcasts argued whether the sport's obsession with etiquette and legacy was holding it back from real progress. Suddenly, the Ryder Cup wasn't just a competition, it was a referendum on golf's identity. Within weeks, whispers grew louder. Some insiders hinted that the PGA feared a Bradley effect, the idea that one captain's outburst could reshape tournament policy. Younger players privately backed him, saying they'd been frustrated for years by old-fashioned procedures that make golf look rigid in a changing sports culture. Older veterans, meanwhile, rallied around Donald's defense of heritage, calling Bradley's comments reckless populism. Behind closed doors, both camps, reform and tradition, started lobbying for control of the narrative. PR teams drafted statements, tour officials formed review committees, and social media continued to churn, feeding on every rumor of change. Even sponsors began weighing in, quietly warning that fan frustration could hurt future ratings if the sport refused to evolve. Bradley's 3 words, "It has to change," had become a movement. What started as post-match frustration was now a philosophical debate. Should golf modernize its rules for fairness and entertainment, or preserve its rituals no matter how outdated they seem? And as the next Ryder Cup loomed, both sides realized the same truth. This wasn't just about one envelope anymore. It was about who gets to decide what golf becomes next. As the weeks passed, the noise faded, but the tension didn't. Inside locker rooms, practice ranges, and private meetings, the aftershocks of Bethpage still lingered. Bradley's fire had shaken the system, and now every captain, coach, and player was second-guessing how much emotion to show in public. For years, golf had been the sport of poker faces and polite applause, but Bethpage cracked that illusion. Viewers saw real frustration, real pride, and a raw competitiveness that made golf feel alive again. Behind the scenes, sources whispered that the next generation of players, the ones growing up with cameras in their faces and social media in their hands, were quietly siding with Bradley. They didn't want to inherit a game where silence meant respect and criticism meant betrayal. They wanted transparency, personality, and passion. To them, the Ryder Cup had finally looked like a battle, not a gentleman's agreement. But for others inside the establishment, Bethpage was a warning. Donald's composure became the gold standard, proof that discipline still wins the long game. Young captains in waiting studied his demeanor the way they'd study a perfect swing. He showed that leadership in golf wasn't about noise, it was about control. And control, in a sport built on patience and poise, was everything. Psychologists who study sports culture began weighing in, calling the Bradley-Donald saga a case study in modern competition. One man represented the instinct to challenge the system, the other the instinct to protect it. Both necessary, both fragile. Sponsors quietly loved it, passion sells, and so does tradition. Ratings spiked, debate thrived, and for the first time in years, golf wasn't just background noise on a Sunday afternoon, it was headline news. The mental game had shifted. Every captain now knew that the next Ryder Cup wouldn't just be fought with clubs and tactics, but with perception. Would they dare to speak out like Bradley, or keep their cool like Donald? The 2025 Cup didn't just test players, it rewired the psychology of golf itself. Years from now, people won't remember every shot or every score from Bethpage 2025. They'll remember the tension, the press room sparks, the crowd chaos, the captain who snapped, and the one who stayed silent. They'll remember how a rule meant to preserve fairness ended up dividing a sport that once prided itself on calm civility and quiet respect. Keegan Bradley walked away branded as both hero and troublemaker, the man who refused to swallow tradition just because it was tradition. He didn't win the trophy, but he won something else: attention. His frustration spoke to a generation tired of watching golf bury emotion beneath etiquette. Luke Donald, in contrast, left as the calm keeper of order, a symbol of grace under fire, showing that composure can be just as powerful as confrontation. Together they gave golf something it hadn't had in years: relevance beyond the fairway. Bethpage became more than a golf course. It became a battleground of philosophies: old versus new, passion versus control, tradition versus reform. It showed that even in a sport built on quiet focus and handshakes, chaos can find its way in. And maybe, just maybe, that's what golf needed. Because for one electric weekend, golf wasn't background noise, it was the headline. The envelope rule might disappear, evolve, or simply be renamed, but its shadow will linger. It reminded everyone that behind every rulebook lies a question: who does it truly serve? Fans saw how fairness, when twisted by procedure, can become its own kind of injustice. And that realization opened the door to something bigger: the courage to question long-standing traditions that no longer make sense. Even the sport's elders, who once dismissed Bradley's comments as impulsive, began acknowledging the truth buried beneath his anger. Golf has always been slow to change, methodical, patient, proud of its roots, but Bethpage cracked that patience open. It forced the sport to confront the possibility that respect doesn't mean silence, and that emotion doesn't mean weakness. In the years that follow, the Bradley versus Donald debate will fade, but its echoes will shape how captains lead, how players speak, and how fans see the game. Sponsors will remember the spike in attention. Young golfers will remember the moment the sport looked alive, human, and unpredictable again. Bethpage Black will always be remembered as more than a tournament. It was a turning point, a storm that ripped through golf's traditions and forced everyone to ask whether the game's old rules still fit its new generation. Because golf, for all its elegance, is still played by people, imperfect, passionate, and hungry for fairness. As 2027 at Adair Manor approaches, one question remains: can golf evolve without losing its soul? The answer might not lie in a rulebook, but in the courage of its players, the ones willing to speak up, to challenge, and to carry the spirit of Bethpage forward into the future.